it's a blessing that we can, as children of God, meet together like this. This morning, I was thinking about something. Well, I've been thinking about it for a while. I was having devotions, my personal devotions one morning, and I came across this chapter, John chapter 6, and we'll probably preach out of that this morning. You can turn to that if you'd like. And there's a simple happening there that I've heard many, many times. And I'm sure you've heard of it too. It's a story that we tell our children, and we enjoy extolling the virtues of it and all that. But there is more to it than just a good story. There's things that we can take from it as well. And I don't know, as we sit and read the newspapers or read the headlines, or we read the papers that we get in the mail from CAM or whatever, we are become aware of needs around us. World needs, there's hunger, there's people that are suffering for their faith. There are people that are suffering from disease, from sickness. There's so many needs out there across, in foreign countries, but there's a lot of needs around us as well. There are needs. You can go to Lake City or, any big town really, and there's people on the street corners with cardboard signs they're holding up, help, anything helps, God bless, whatever the sign says. And I know some of them are probably needy and some of them probably aren't. We don't know that. But they all look needy. And that it's representative of needs around us. And Jesus used a lot of parables in his ministry. They're earthly stories with heavenly meanings. And he also did miracles, which were miracles. There were actions with heavenly meanings as well. And some of his miracles, or maybe all of the miracles, are parables in action, I call it. And the key verse I'd like to think of this morning is I wrote it down on my notes, but it didn't translate over to my sermon here. But it's, I am the bread of life. I am the bread of life. That is a key verse there. But the title I'd like to give the message is, Would You Give Your Lunch? Kendrick, would you give your lunch if somebody asked you for it? If you are really hungry, you probably would. You're a good boy. I don't know. Russell, would you give your lunch? Probably so. I've been with Russell already when I don't think he would have given his lunch. He was pretty hungry. I'm sure other people can be that way too. But an earthly story with a heavenly meaning, or an earthly example with a heavenly meaning. The feeding of the 5,000 is an example of this. I'm just going to read in John 6, verse 1. After these things, Jesus went over the Sea of Galilee, which is the Sea of Tiberias. And a great multitude followed him, because they saw his miracles which he did on them that were diseased. And Jesus went up into a mountain, and there he sat with his disciples. And the Passover, a feast of the Jews, was nigh. When Jesus then lifted up his eyes, and saw a great company come unto him, he saith unto Philip, Whence shall we buy bread, that these may eat? And this he said to prove him, for he himself knew what he would do. Philip answered him, 200 penny worth of bread is not sufficient for them, that every one of them may take a little. And 200 penny worth is noteworthy here, because I understand that 1 penny was considered a day's wage for an average laborer in that time. One penny. So 200 pennies would be about 8 months worth of, or months worth of wages. So how many of you would be willing to give 7 months of wages to buy bread for a crowd of people? I don't know, but I don't know why he said 200 penny worth. That might be what they had with them. I don't know. But 200 penny worth of bread was not sufficient for them to take a little, for all of them. And one of his disciples, in verse 8, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, saith unto him, There's a lad here, which hath 5 barley loaves, and 2 small fishes. But what are they among so many? What are they among so many? What would you do? Kendrick, I asked you first, would you give your lunch? What would it be like if we were at the fellowship meetings, and there was 700 people there, and there was nothing for lunch, except you were smart enough to bring your lunch. Your mom gave you a lunch in the morning, and you had 5 sandwiches in there because you were hungry, and you were planning to eat all 5 sandwiches, but you only had meat in 2 of them. So you're really, really hungry, but there's 700 people that are hungry, and the preacher gets up and says, "What are we going to do? We don't have any food." Think about that. That's what this little boy did, or this boy. I don't know if he was little, but he had his backpack on, and he had his 5 barley loaves and his 2 small fishes in there. What are they among so many? And Jesus said, Make the men sit down. Luke says that he told them to go and divide all 5,000 men in groups of 50. So they went and had 100 groups, right? And so they had 100 groups of 50 people, or 50 men anyway. There was women and children too, but they put them in groups of 50 all around. There was much grass in the place, so the men sat down in number about 5,000. And Jesus took the loaves, and when he had given thanks, he distributed to the disciples, and the disciples to them that were set down, and likewise of the fishes as much as they would. When they were filled, he said unto his disciples, Gather up the fragments that remain, that nothing be lost. Therefore they gathered them together, and filled 12 baskets with the fragments of the 5 barley loaves, which remained over and above unto them that had eaten. Then those men, when they had seen the miracle that Jesus did, said, This is of a truth that prophet that should come into the world. When Jesus therefore perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him a king, he departed again into a mountain himself alone. That's the story of the feeding of the 5,000. But what are some things that we can learn from that? This boy was like many of you are. He had a stomach that was bigger than anything else on him, probably. And he was hungry. Could be really hungry. But he received his lunch from somebody else. Most likely his mother or his father, I don't know. But he received his lunch from somebody else. He received the bread and he received the fish. And the boy with his lunch is what this story somewhat centers around. One boy, one lunch. 5,000 people. I'm going to use 5,000 because that's the numbers that it gives. 5,000 people. We have Jesus. We have the disciples, just 12 disciples. We have the crowd, the hungry crowd, and a need. Great need. And I don't know, I might be sticking my neck out here a little bit, but one thing that's interesting to me is how the orderliness of God and how he orders things in very minute detail. And in the Old Testament, they had the Hebrew language was very, very expressive in that they would their alphabet was an alphabet, but it also had some numerical meanings as well. The alphabet could double as numbers. Sometimes those numbers had meanings as also. And I'm not an authority on this, but some of this does make sense. But did you notice how many numbers were in this story? What numbers stood out to you in the story? Anybody? What number? 5,000. What else? 50. Okay. What? Anything else? 5. Yep. No. Okay. Let's start with the little boy's lunch. He had 5 loaves and 2 fishes. 5 and 2 make 7. So he had 5 loaves of bread, 2 fish, which makes 7. How many baskets were left over? 12. There's 12 baskets. Notice that, so 5 is the number of grace. 5 it represents the number of grace. 5 is it represents the number of power and divine grace. In the Old Testament, there were 5 kinds of animals that were sacrificed under the Old Covenant law. There was goats, sheep, cattle, pigeons, and doves. There's 5 types of animals that were sacrificed so God would cover the sin. And I don't understand Hebrew, but they say that God changed Abram's name to Abraham by adding the letter / number 5 to his name. I can't prove that. And also Sarai as well. The tabernacle was measured in multiples of 5. That's another interesting. There's 5 books of the law that we attribute to Moses. Matthew's gospel, well, we won't leave that. Jesus bled from 5 wounds on the altar of the cross. His 2 hands, his 2 feet, and his head. And 5 is the number of grace. 2 can be the number is the number of fellowship or double portion, but it can also mean division or difference. But 2 is a number is like a double portion. The children of Israel were forbidden to collect manna on the Sabbath, but they were permitted to collect twice as much on the 5th day, or on the 6th day, excuse me. On the 6th day, because the 7th was the Sabbath. And in the New Testament, Christians also saw this number as a symbol of the second person of the Trinity. But the number 5 is interesting in this context in that it's multiplied to 5,000. And it's also multiplied to 50. But 50 is interesting in that what year was the year of Jubilee? It was the 50th year, right? So they had in the 50th year was the year of deliverance in the Old Testament. It was the year of setting free. It was the year when slaves could be delivered and could be set free. And it's interesting how Jesus takes the bread, the analogy of bread. There's a multitude that's hungry, they need something to fill this void that's in their stomach, literally in their stomach. But also, he is demonstrating the void that's in the heart of man. There's multitudes around us that have a void in their heart. And today, those multitudes are still here. And we have the bread. We have the bread. Each one of us has been given this bread. And if there's 5 loaves, it's grace. God's grace is here. to fill the need, the void in the heart. And we have 5,000. I don't know what that, I didn't look that one up really, but 5,000 is just multiples of 5. It's just a great number. But 50, he had them split up in groups of 50. So he takes the out of the 5,000, there's a group of 50, and he sets them over here. He takes another group of 50 and sets them over here. And then he takes the bread and he gives them to here. Now you are delivered from your hunger, and you are delivered from this hunger. Isn't that interesting? Or it was to me. How he takes the bread, the living bread. Well, in the physical sense, he took literal bread from the one boy, and he blessed it, and he gave it to his disciples to give to these people to deliver them from their hunger. And he did that until it was all done. And then everybody ate as much as they would, and when they were finished, there was 12 baskets full left over. And 12 is a number. 12 is the number of. Let me see here. The number of the church. Well, perfection in government is also the number of the church. Both the Old Covenant Church of Israel was founded by 12 physical fathers, the 12 sons of Jacob. And the New Covenant Church was founded by 12 spiritual apostles, by the apostles. There was 12 apostles. And it gives some examples there. There's 12 months in the year, 12 tribes of Israel, 12 things. But it's representative of the church. There was 12 baskets full left over of this deliverance bread, or the delivered from hunger. When Christ takes this bread, he expands it and makes it available for the multitudes. But you know, Christ had the power to take that and just throw the bread crumbs out across the crowd and it would just fill them up, right? He had the power to do that. But he didn't. He took the voluntary gift that the boy gave him of the lunch. And he blessed it. And he started breaking bread and he gave it to his disciples. He gives it to Andrew. Here, you go. Just gives it to Andrew, and he gives it to Peter, and he gives it to John, and he gives it to Bartholomew, and down the line he goes. And they take this bread and they just go they take it from Jesus to the group. Another thing that I thought was interesting is that he organized them in groups. So the multitudes, we talk about the needs in the world. There's needs all around us. But God has also organized a local body of believers. We've all been part of that multitude. All of us have been part of that multitude. And we are here in the group of 50, so to speak, receiving the bread. And we can add to that group from the multitudes outside. We can add more. And as we receive of the Lord, we can share, just like the disciples did. But in the multitude, it was a voluntary choice for them to sit down. They didn't have to. If Andrew came up to them, said, okay, so I need you and you and you and you to come over here and sit down, they wouldn't have had to. They could have said, no, I'm good. I don't need any bread today. But it doesn't say they all went over to sit down. They all ate their fill. they all had leftovers. The story of that food that was given translates into Jesus saying, I am the bread of life. If we go to read the rest of that chapter there in John 6, it was a hard saying. It was easy for them to identify eating the bread, but it was hard for them to translate that into a spiritual need. And the day following, when the people, in verse 22 here, the day following, when the people which stood on the other side of the sea saw that there was none other boat there, save that one whereinto his disciples were entered, and that Jesus went not with his disciples into the boat, but that his disciples were gone away alone. Howbeit there came other boats to check on them. When the people therefore saw that Jesus was not there, neither his disciples, they also took shipping and came to Capernaum, seeking for Jesus. And when they had found him on the other side of the sea, they said unto him, Rabbi, when camest thou hither? Jesus answered them and said, Verily, verily, I say unto you, ye seek me, not because ye saw the miracles, but because ye did eat of the loaves and were filled. In other ways, you're looking for me because you want another meal. But labor not for the meat which perisheth, but for that meat which endureth unto everlasting life, which the Son of Man shall give unto you. For him hath God the Father sealed. And they said unto him, What shall we do, that we might work the works of God? Jesus answered and said, This is the work of God, that you believe on him who he hath sent. They said unto him, What sign showest thou then, that we may see and believe thee? What dost thou work? Our fathers did eat manna in the desert, as it is written, He gave them bread from heaven to eat. Then Jesus said unto them, Verily, verily I say unto you, Moses gave you not that bread from heaven, but my Father giveth you the true bread from heaven. For the bread of God is he which cometh down from heaven, and giveth life unto the world. And then said they unto him, Lord, evermore give us this bread. And Jesus said unto them, I am the bread of life. He that cometh to me shall never hunger, and he that believeth on me shall never thirst. But I said unto you that ye also have seen me, and believe not. And the Father giveth, all that the Father giveth me shall come to me, and him that cometh to me I will in no wise cast out. For I came down from heaven, not to do mine own will, but the will of him that sent me. And this is the Father's will, which hath sent me, that of all which he hath given me I should lose nothing, but should raise it up again at the last day. And this is the will of him that sent me, that every one which seeth the Son and believeth on him may have everlasting life, and I will raise him up at the last day. And we'll stop there. But bread is a symbol of food. And Jesus was translating, he was trying to explain that hunger, physical hunger, is a recurring thing. But spiritual hunger is a need that you cannot fill on your own. You need to accept the bread of life. And I am that bread of life. I am that bread of life. Believe on me. They couldn't quite wrap their mind around it. Later on it says, well, why should we believe on you? We know where you come from. Your dad is the carpenter down here. And we know who you are. And you're saying that you're the bread of life? Anyway, they could not wrap their mind around it. But how are we today? Are we able to give, to show that bread, show the way to those that are hungry that come into our symbol or bread is food, but it's also symbolic of the church. If you think about what goes into bread, you take hard wheat. Now, if you have the wheat berries, and you try to mix them up with in water and whatever you would mix bread up. If you mix the berries up without preparing them and try to bake bread with it, you would have some crunchy bread. It would not act right. But if you run it through the grinder and it comes out as flour, then run it through the process, the individual kernels lose their individuality, and they just all go back and forth. I don't know what process you call it, but there's a reaction, or it changes. It changes from dry powder to soft bread. The yeast in the bread actually turns it into somewhat of a living organism almost, because that dough it rises. The fermented yeast actually makes that bread rise. You can make bread without yeast, but it still takes that fermenting action to make it work. That's the way it is in the church. We have to lose ourselves and allow that fermenting action of the Holy Spirit to mold us together to make something that is a living organism that is pleasing to God. You know, God has likes and dislikes. In Revelation, it talks about God not liking lukewarm water, or lukewarmness. Nobody likes lukewarm. If something that's supposed to be cold or hot, if it's lukewarm, it's not good. God doesn't like it either. God doesn't like bread that's crunchy either. And so bread is an example of the church. I kind of got on a bunny trail there, but bread is an example of the church. But we have been given the living bread. We are part of the living bread, and we are here to offer that to the multitudes around us. Jesus has given us the bread of life. Are we feeding on it? On His Word, absorbing it and digesting it so that we can pass it on? The multitudes are still with us, and we've been given the basket from God to pass on. Are we willing to pass on that bread that we have received, or are we content to eat the lunch ourselves? Are we willing to give our lunch? And as disciples of Christ, are we willing to do like the disciples did and organize the multitudes into groups and feed them? You know, in our churches, we have so many needs in our own church. I realize that. There's needs all around us. Inside, there's needs outside. And we need to partake of the bread ourselves so we can pass it on. We can't, just because we are in this group today, doesn't mean that we can just give all the time. We have to take some of it ourselves and feed on it so we can give it. In our life, there's give and take that needs to happen to feed the multitudes, to pass that bread on. God's blessing is still there. He can take the small lunch that we give Him, and He blesses it to feed the multitudes. Anybody that comes, there's enough to feed everybody, that it will never run out. With God's blessing, that bread never runs out. But if we don't eat it, then we can't pass it on. And so, I'm just going to challenge you. Let's eat the bread, and let's take some bread and give our lunch to Jesus and pass it on to other people. And keep your eyes open. There's needs around us. There are needs. See if you can find somebody that you can share some bread with this week. God bless you. Let's bow our heads for prayer. Our Father, we thank you for the bread that you have given us.